the risks of working at a craft brewery. We have a band here tonight who is doing sound check right now. So if you start
Oh,
picking up anything, let me know and I can switch to headphones. But um, it's quite loud.
very cool. Are you going to jump in on their set at all? Because we all know that you were in a
No,
band.
no, yeah, it's this band called, actually, no, I don't think they're from Austin. For some reason, I thought they were from Austin. St. Paul and the Broken Bone. So they're kind of like this 70s soul, like pretty big touring act.
Cool.
So anyways, yeah, they sound awesome. So I actually like want to go tonight.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. How often do you guys get bands at the brewery?
We do smaller bands, I think mostly Friday nights and Saturdays, I think during the day sometimes. And then we've got a couple of shows set up with Washington's, which is kind of the music venue here in town, to do a couple of like bigger outdoor concerts. In addition, obviously, Tour de Fat is a whole separate thing. So we only do a couple of shows like this where it'll be 5,000 people. It'll be a big night tonight.
Nice. Well, cool. Well, we'll let you off the hook early and easy so you can prep for that. Not really, but let me give you an official BeerNet Radio welcome. So I'd like to welcome to BeerNet Radio Shaun Belongie, CEO of New Belgium Brewing Co. as of last November. He led marketing for about 5 years before that, of course, helping the rise of Voodoo Ranger, which is still one of the bright storylines in beer today. For example, year to date, the New Belgium brand family is up a bit over 10% in dollars in Circana Milk. Of course, again, driven by the continued success of the Voodoo Ranger franchise. So welcome, Shaun.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, so we thought we'd start off with a little bit of fun, speaking of Voodoo Ranger. How often do people come up and pitch new Voodoo Ranger variants to you?
Mostly new character variants. So I think that's the fun part about Voodoo Ranger is just kind of imagining where the character will go next and what that character will get up to. And so that's what we tend to hear from people is kind of the character ideas.
We have some for you, Shaun.
Okay. Uh-oh. Okay.
We're professionals. We looked at the data. We looked at some new demographics you might want to break into.
Okay. I should have you sign some kind of NDA or release before you reveal these. So if they're really good, I can just take them.
Just send it over DocuSign, right?
Okay.
Like none of these people matter. Voodoo Ranger Thunder Thighs.
Okay. Give me more about that. I don't know why.
That's as far as I've gotten.
Yeah,
but I have more if you don't like. Voodoo Ranger Wiling Out with Nick Cannon.
Yeah.
Showing my age there.
Yeah, there's probably some things we'll have to figure out from a celebrity perspective, but I like it.
Cross promos.
Yeah.
Jordan actually has a really good idea. Go ahead, Jordan.
I think I've pitched this one to you before and I haven't seen it, so I want to bring this back up top of mind for you. But Voodoo Ranger non-alc and all the O's are 0.0s.
So yes.
Okay. Quadruple the zeros, high octane non-alc.
Yes, that's the part I try to wrap my head around is like, how would there be a high octane non-alc?
Never been so sober
for the consumers to figure out.
Yeah.
Maybe there could be question marks instead of some of the zero. I don't know. But
this is the fun of Voodoo Ranger, though. It just immediately kind of breeds more and more ideas once you kind of get into the brand, which is what makes it so fun to work on.
Right. Well, and in the most recent Circana week, I know Pacifico's kind of right on your tail, so you might need a Pacifico killer like Voodoo Ranger Muy Fuerte or something. Like.
Oh, now here we go.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well, let's ask some actual questions. Right.
Okay.
So we had you on the stage in January, and so I think we're going to do like a part 2 of some of the things we delved in there. Now that it's halfway through the year, my gosh, actually more. So one of the things we talked about was hard charge tea, right? Your big entry into the hard tea space. Now, of course, what has ended up happening is a straight Voodoo Ranger variant, which is Tropic Force, has been your top new brand of the year. And in fact, it's a top new beer brand overall. I believe it's like number 6 or 7 in terms of dollars added. But the fact that was the thing that is your top new brand versus your entry into the hard tea space, what does that say about the Voodoo Ranger franchise? What does it say about the hard tea segment?
I mean, a couple things I think it probably says, one is obviously we are known as a craft beer, still a craft beer brand. And so when you look at actually the kind of overall awareness of Voodoo Ranger, it's relatively low for what is the biggest brand in craft. It's somewhere in the 50 to 60 range. And so when you think about extending the brand into new categories, there's a learning curve that I think has to happen. And I'm always surprised when I talk to somebody who is not a craft beer fan, and they might have seen the skeleton, they may have seen the brand, but they're just not really very well aware of what the brand is about. And so I think, to me, that really speaks to that opportunity to kind of build the franchise over time, where we are operating in the craft beer space, where we're very well known. Our distributors and retailers know exactly what to do with the brand, how to execute it. It works. And we've seen that obviously with Tropic Force. And where Hard Charge Tea is a new segment, new category, new execution, things that we need, just kind of a learning curve for all of us across kind of the entire commercialization landscape. It's a much more challenging thing to get up and running. That said, we're seeing a lot of success with it. When we look at the numbers, Tropic Force is, as you said, the number one beer launch of the year, so new item. And when you put all the Hard Charge Tea variants together, which we have the 2 single serves and the variety pack, that's actually the number 2 total beer category launch. So they're right there, 1 and 2, which to us is a real feather in the cap, in the sense that I don't know of any other craft brewery that's had top 2 beer category launches in a single year. So we're really proud of that. Yeah. So despite, I think, the Hard Charge Tea, as you said, kind of getting a little bit slower out of the gates, it's still performing very well.
And then I think, I can't remember if it was at the summit or prior to that, but we discussed, either the Voodoo Ranger franchise or other things in New Belgium may be going into different segments that they hadn't before. And you had kind of said that Hard Charge Tea was a bit of a litmus test to see maybe how stretchy you guys are. Have you gotten that permission to go into other segments with Voodoo Ranger or anything else?
Yeah, I think we do have that permission. I think when I talk to our distributor network, they are seeing us more and more as a, total alcohol beverage provider. They're not just seeing us as a craft brewery anymore. So I think, again, that's going to take time, and that's just going to take, more effort and more, success ultimately to fully kind of make that transition. But I think we're headed in that direction for sure. I think the other thing we've been cautioned on as we talk to particularly our distributor councils, just craft as a category tends to turn things over very quickly, right? It's just kind of like that kind of innovation train is really moving fast in the craft category. And so I think the caution we've gotten is just build this thing more slowly over time. Don't, have the temptation or succumb to some temptation, which I think craft often does, is like, oh, we've had some good success with Hard Charge Tea. Bam, let's do a lemonade. It's like, no, because then all the attention comes off the tea product. So we really need to start thinking about longer time frames to build brands, which I think, again, starts to lead to that mindset of not just being a craft brewery and looking for constant churn of innovation, but really that idea of building brands over time.
So no Voodoo Ranger seltzer, right?
not anytime in the near future. But I think, again, because we really need to have that foundation of Hard Charge Tea, I think, to be successful, to then start thinking about where else could you go? Where else would this brand make sense?
I feel like Voodoo it's a craft brand for sure, but it has kind of played in an F&B lane with higher flavor, higher ABV, single serve. Any interesting insights in officially crossing into that lane with Hard Charge Tea, and were the craft drinkers migrating to F&B, or who is drinking? What have you learned there with Hard Charge?
Yeah, I think we're seeing some crossovers for sure, especially from our, as you said, kind of our more maybe blurring of lines between our kind of F&B and craft beer, and that's particularly in the Force series, Juice Force, Tropic Force, Fruit Force. We are seeing quite a bit of crossover there, but I think then we're also seeing people come from where you would expect in the world of kind of just all the other blurry stuff, seltzers, FMBs, teas. I think one of the things we've been clear on from the beginning, and I think was critical for our distributor network and retailers as well, was like, if Hard Charge Tea is going to come at the expense of Twisted Tea, like that doesn't do anything for anybody. And so the idea of like, how does this build the category incrementally by bringing in people who maybe aren't necessarily drinking hard tea today? That's our hope, and that's kind of, it's early days, but that is what we're seeing. And I think one of the things that our distributors are happy about, and I think retailers in general are also happy about, is like, yes, Twisted Tea has seen some share losses, but generally that brand is still really humming. Mm-hmm. And so the hard tea category is still very healthy. And as I think about it, there's a lot of stuff in there that's going to get culled out that just is not performing. But there are a couple brands that I think, along with Twisted Tea, will add something to that category and continue to drive momentum behind it. And I think hard charge tea is one of those.
Yeah. And then just on the subject of voodoo drinkers, I know we pitched some brands that probably won't see the light of day, but you're engaged with your audience, and what are they asking for? Are they asking for more beer, more flavor, more ABV, less? What do they want from the brand?
Yeah, I think the thing that has really been interesting is that we hear so many people, and we see this in the data as well, who say, I was not an IPA drinker. I don't like IPAs. And all of a sudden I'm drinking this Juice Force, for example, and I guess I'm an IPA drinker now. This is weird. And so I think there's a comfort level, and to some degree, I think this is probably as we see our age demographics younger than most in craft beer, where the kind of younger cohorts, obviously legal aged and above, are more comfortable with just blurring of lines, and they're not so focused on styles. And so I think when we hear from our fans, they're just like, I'm looking for stuff that tastes great. And there's also this like energy level of like Voodoo Ranger is going to turn it up. And so really the combination we look for is, how can we bring something flavor wise that, is going to just be a great, delicious tasting product, but maybe have that kind of energy or kind of ability to turn up the night, that I think is part and parcel of the brand.
Yeah.
So turning up is part of the DNA, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's, these are high flavor, high octane beers generally. And at the same time, we do look at opportunities to think about, where else the brand, can play given its DNA, even in craft beer. And so obviously we've had a couple different opportunities where we've experimented with either, thinking about a lager, which we had in the test market in North Carolina, and it just didn't resonate as we thought it did. We had a pale ale, American Haze, that was, kind of testing more of a sessionable, ABV type perspective, didn't quite work. So we continue to look for those opportunities as well, as like, where else are we missing kind of in the universe that's not going to be, it's not going to be something that's completely separate from the rest of the Voodoo franchise. Because I think that's where you start losing people, where it's like, whoa, that's a disconnect from what I expect. But are there other places in the category that are also our opportunity given that kind of brand DNA?
Well, just one more from me real quick is, you've introduced a big new year-round variant to the Voodoo franchise for the past few years. How long should we expect that to continue?
Yeah, it's a great question. Very timely question, because we are really wrestling with that ourselves. And again, I think this is, where, my experience in working at big kind of consumer packaged goods companies and a number of other people here who have worked at consumer packaged goods companies really does come into play, because we're really dealing with a very big brand now. And you really have to start thinking about incrementality and how do you not cannibalize your own brands that you're going to have on shelf, either by losing them on shelf or just people going, oh, okay, I got these, I'm going to choose this one, not that one. So we're really thinking hard about that. And again, that's in some ways where it comes back to this idea of like, what are we missing in the category? Because we could, but I know where this ends, having worked in a lot of different categories. If we just keep extending the flavor franchise of the Force, into, throw out your flavor cotton candy or something, like it's eventually going to collapse upon itself, because it just, what usually see happening is somebody flavor extends the hell out of a brand franchise, then things fall apart, that person leaves, the next person comes in and is like, what the hell were they thinking? I got to cut this all back to the core. Right. And then you kind of start, and here we go again and again. So we're trying to avoid that cycle of just flavor extending, because again, a lot of us have been in big companies where we've seen where that ends. So trying to be much more thoughtful. And in fact, our distributors and retailers are also kind of asking those same questions of, hey, let's make sure that what we're adding is actually being incremental, because as we all know, the shelf isn't getting bigger. And even for a brand as successful as Voodoo Ranger, there is a limit there. And so you do start ending up really feeding off your own success in a way that is going to be problematic long term.
Right. I don't know what you're talking about, Shaun. I've never seen that happen ever.
I think you've seen a couple different versions of that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the wholesaler network a couple of times. We have a lot of wholesaler readers and listeners. I think we may have touched on this at this summit, but you do have significant overlap with Boston, right? Because you mentioned not doing distributors a favor if you displace, Twisted Tea. Was that by design, or like, how did that happen?
I have to go back in the history books here, and I'm going to be speaking from third-hand knowledge. But really, the process that we went through as we kind of built out, state by state by state, and really it was really fat tire driven at that point, was really trying to find the best distributor network in each state, and it was certainly a process where, yes, you were drawing on the knowledge, and we have a lot of people who have worked at Boston in the past, and or other beer companies who had experience, obviously, with distributors in other states, even if we were not open. New Belgium was not open in those states. But it really was a process where it's like, hey, if you're interested, we brought everyone in to kind of understand, what do we think the best network is going to look like? And oftentimes there was quite a bit of overlap with Boston Beer, but in some cases there weren't. And then there's, a whole bunch of reasons for that. But so we do have a lot of overlap. And so we do have to think about, especially as we look to expand outside of traditional craft, where are those places where we're actually, again, going to be an incremental presence for a wholesaler, and not, competing directly with other suppliers, not just Boston, in a way that's not, helpful for the kind of overall perspective of a wholesaler.
Right. And Jordan asked sort of a little bit about this, but in terms of what wholesalers are asking from you guys, it almost seems like the next obvious steps might be spirits, or even something like D9 or non-alc, or what are you looking at?
Yeah, we are looking at a lot of different categories, and partly it's an exercise to kind of, what do we not want to do? There's so many different things you can do, and that's been a helpful conversation as we go through that with our parent company and Kieran Lyon, to kind of understand what are those places where there might be larger perspectives that Kieran is thinking through from a spirits perspective, for example, as they own Four Roses as well. And so we've, from our perspective, we've kind of excluded spirits for now, at least from a, kind of what you would think of traditional spirits. We are certainly thinking about from a spirits RTD perspective, and that's kind of in our lane and in our playground, if you will, of things we're thinking about. But we've actually tried to kind of find those places where we can actually exclude opportunities, because again, there's so much stuff that you could look at. D9 is another one of those where that's just not a place where our parent company necessarily feels comfortable participating. And I think even if I was thinking about that space, it's like spirits and even more challenging from a regulatory perspective. So I think for us, those are excluded, which again allows us to help focus what we're going to be doing, which I think our distributors are happy about, that we're not just, throwing a bunch of stuff on the wall in a bunch of different categories, because I don't think that's really helpful.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I don't envy you. It's a tough time to innovate and stay in a carved out lane, and there's not a lot of low hanging fruit left, right? So you certainly earn your paycheck.
I think everyone in the category right now, there's two. I think you can look at it in two ways. Like, it's really tough in some ways right now. And I think there are still opportunities out there because there are just ways that, the blurring of lines creates those opportunities because that really creates innovation. And so there are certainly, again, when you look at the kind of category dynamics, those are a challenge. When you look at some of because we're seeing different companies play in so many different spaces, like, maybe that's a challenge. But I do think the blurring aspect does open up opportunities where innovation can come out of places that are a bit unexpected, and we continue obviously to really push hard into that space because that's been really the lifeblood of our business, is being able to find new opportunities consistently.
Right. And then I'm curious, because you mentioned Kieran Lyon, and of course that's part of this whole conversation. In terms of strategic development, where you go, how you move, what you enter, how much of the boots on the ground of New Belgium Bell's leadership is charging that, is owning that versus your Kieran Lyon ownership? How many direct directives do they give you, or do they mostly leave it up to you, basically?
Yeah, there's very few directives. I actually can't think of one at this point where it was like, hey, we really need you to do this. Certainly there's a collaborative aspect to that, in the sense that they want to understand kind of what we're doing and kind of how we're seeing the category, and therefore what our strategy is going to be, because ultimately they have to sign a check if they're going to do that, or in the case of an Ichiban, decide to assign us the brand. And so those are decisions that they have to make. But when they look at the category and they look for leadership in the category, it's really coming from us. They have that trust, and they have this perspective of really decentralized leadership where they're saying, hey, you're the expert in this market. Help us to understand what's happening in the market, how you're thinking about it. There certainly is overlap relative to, by the way, just in other markets, we're seeing, Australia, Japan, we're seeing some of the same dynamics that are playing out in the US in slightly different ways, but there are learnings that can kind of cross borders in that way too. But really they're asking us to drive that strategy, and where we see opportunities that we can plug into their network, either through brands or through opportunities to look for acquisitions. Certainly they need to be on board with that, but certainly that strategy is really coming from the US and this leadership team for US craft.
Right. And then just one more quick one, and I'll kick it back over to Jay. But, obviously you mentioned being assigned Ichiban. We covered that a month or two ago. You guys will be responsible taking over from AB for production, marketing, sales. I assume that means it's going to align with your network as well. And if so, how long do you guys expect that to take?
So I have the lawyers tell me that I have to give you the caveat that, of course, the transition period continues through December 31st of this year. So until then, it is really ABI, and Kieran, and working through that transition with us. So I think as we think about the network, there's obviously some overlap already based on kind of what we have in our distributor network and kind of what the AB network looked like. And so, we would assume that wouldn't change. But I think the big question that we'll need to sort out with the existing distributor network, and it'll take some time, is Kieran was obviously a small part of a very large system where it filled up a little part of a truck. Now we're going to have a challenge if Kieran is the only brand in that particular house that we are supplying. That could get pretty challenging just from a logistics standpoint. And so that'll be the thing we have to sort out, is what kind of scale is in each market. How is that distributor doing with that? What else could we work to kind of provide to them, or is there a different way to think about that? And that's going to really, I think, then drive the distributor kind of alignment question, is how do we make this make sense for all parties? Because it's not going to make sense if a distributor is, ordering 100 cases a year. It's that's going to be tough if that's the only thing on a truck. I could drop that in a pickup truck and drive it over, but at some point, like in realistic terms, that's going to be a challenging kind of ongoing thing. So that'll really drive that, and I think we'll sort that out in the next year or so, I would say.
In taking on Ichiban production, I know you said you're confident in your capacity to do so, but can you kind of give us like a little look at where capacity stands, and can you still add to some of your existing breweries, or does this cause you to kind of keep your ears and eyes open for maybe another facility on the block?
Yeah, you're just picking at the scabs of all of our internal conversations. If our operations team listens to this, they may have a different perspective. Yeah, because I think part of our challenge is really sorting out. So to answer the question shortly, in the shortest way possible, we do have capacity. I think, and it should not be an issue for us to have capacity for both Kieran and kind of the rest of the portfolio as well. I think the challenge for us gets to be in trying to look into the crystal ball for what the future looks like 2 years from now, and what part of our capacity is going to be taken up by beer, and what part of our capacity is going to be taken up by things that are not beer, not considered traditional beer. So things like F&Bs or RTDs, because you get to a very different picture and answer. Depending on your answer to that part of it, of like what part of your portfolio will be beer and what won't be. And a lot of that ends up funneling through Daleville, which has been, this awesome ad because it really can do all kinds of things. But we're really reaching a point now with Daleville where we really have to go, okay, yeah, but what is it going to do? Is it going to do a lot of beer? Is it going to do RTDs? Is that where it's going to be primarily focused? And so that's the thing we're really trying to sort out. That's, as you can imagine, really challenging, because if we have that crystal ball to understand what the category is going to look like in 2 years, let alone 2 months from now, I think we could probably all go into consulting and make a lot of money. So that's really the challenge, is like, we can fit Ichiban into the footprint, and we can grow Ichiban, and we can grow the rest of our beer brands. It's really a matter of like, okay, but then if you really want to ramp up, or you need to ramp up an RTD F&B perspective, then you start running into beer issues from a supply perspective, because you've taken some of that capacity and reoriented it to a different direction.
One more on the pickup of Kieran production, sales, and marketing. On the marketing part, can you share a little on that responsibility and what will change there, and how you think about marketing with this brand, especially, given the relation, because it didn't seem like that was there for the past relationship with AB. So how will things change there?
Yeah, I think the conversation we've had is certainly the brand has momentum in the US already. So part of what we want to make sure is do no harm, right? Out of the gates. And I think where the brand obviously is really well established is kind of more in the on-premise than what we tend to see from our brands, which are very off-premise focused. And so we do have to protect that from both the sales and marketing perspective in the short term. But then as we think about the longer term and the opportunity that I think we essentially presented to Kieran and said, hey, this is where I think we can take this brand, is to really think about the brand, not just in the traditional sense of where it usually shows up, which you can imagine as Asian restaurants and sushi restaurants and the kind of typical places that you'd expect to see that beer, but really thinking about it in broader terms from a lifestyle brand perspective. And so that's the work we're really trying to do now, to understand how would you take this brand from a place where it obviously has really strong connections to Japan, and kind of being one of the most popular beers in Japan, and kind of all that comes with that from a consumer perspective, to thinking about, yes, and where else, can we think about this brand where we can move it from, a solid brand, to, hey, could this become a real player in the import space in a broader sense? And that's where the big unlock is, if we can figure that out.
Yeah. Do you think Asian imports can ever be like Mexican imports volumetrically in the United States? I mean, that would be the goal, right?
Yes. Yeah. I doubt that that's going to be the case. I think there's some things working for Mexican imports from a demographics perspective, from just a mindset perspective that people have about Mexico and the vacations and there's all kinds of things wrapped up in that I think drive that category in a way that would be tough to replicate in a different import space. But that said, I think there are other opportunities from a lifestyle perspective to draw upon that certainly could make Japanese imports more largely. I think we are seeing, again, momentum behind that space generally, but could turn it into something that is much, much bigger than it is today. Probably not going to be at the level where the Mexican import beers have gotten, just because that's stratospheric. But the hope is that it can be a lot bigger.
I'm curious because, we mentioned Daleville. First of all, another thing that's kind of taking up space there is you guys still do a little bit of contract for Constellation there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Other than that, if I were a bright tank at Daleville right now on the wall, what would I see going on? Anything interesting?
So the team has just done an incredible job of ramping up Juice Force, Fruit Forest, Tropic Forest. So they're one of the big forest breweries for us, which is not an easy beer to make. I think we've seen that as other breweries have tried to replicate our success. Some of them that I've had are not at the same place that Forest is. So that's hugely impressive that they were able to do that so quickly. And they've spent the last couple of months really putting in some heroic efforts to bring hard charge tea to Daleville. So that is now being produced in Daleville as we speak, which was a pretty significant undertaking just to get the alcohol-based production to the place where we felt really good about it. So those are the two biggest pieces of what you'd see in Bright Tanks. And as you said, we also have some contract brewing, and we're also we're always thinking about, are there other opportunities where a contract thing would make sense, particularly non-alc. There's all kinds of things that brewery can do. So we're always looking for those types of things, and at the same time, just being cautious about how much that would derate the brewery from what we can actually get out of it.
Yeah, that's going to be a tricky sync, right? Because contract is nice because it helps you be efficient. But then, like you said, if you need the space and hedging against that, forecasting is the hardest part of your job, right?
It's the hardest part of the job for sure. Yes. I think everyone right now is wrestling with that. And it's probably the worst I've seen it, just from a week to week basis of going, what in the hell is that about? And then, but that week, but this week, and this, but
July 4th-ish.
I can't, it's very challenging to kind of then take that and go, okay, great. We know what's going to happen in the next 8 weeks. Good luck.
Yeah. How much of it do you think has to do with the economy?
I think we're seeing that play out in craft for sure. I think one of the big concerns that I have, and I've had a lot of conversations with distributors about this as well, is the 6-pack, space. We're seeing pretty significant declines across the board in that space, and what we're seeing is people trading up to 12-packs, which makes sense. There's a value play there. And I think that value has probably increased to some degree in terms of what you're getting on a per ounce basis. So if you like a brand, you're kind of moving to the 12-pack. But what's happening is, as people are going, the 6-pack is not such a good deal. They're also then leaving that channel and going to single serve, which has benefited us just from because the price point is lower on an absolute basis. But I really worry about long-term if we see that hollowing out of 6-packs, knowing that's where most people come to the category for craft, which is definitely an anomaly in the beer category, that size segment is such an important part of it. But I do think we're really seeing the economy play a role in that, of people looking for value on one side or the other. They're either dropping down to single serves because they're worried about price point, or they're moving to 12-packs because they're looking for value kind of on a per ounce basis or per can basis.
Yeah. But and then I guess the majority of the RTD spirits are 4 or 8-packs, right? Are you seeing anything around that?
Yeah. So we don't have as much. I don't spend as much time on the 4 and 8-pack, so I don't actually know if they're seeing the kind of similar dynamics that we were seeing in craft. But I think, again, particularly for craft, just because we know that 6-pack is the entry point to the category from so many people. Like if you really lose that and people are thinking this is not a value and are trading down to something else in other categories, that's a problem for us long term. And I do think a lot of that's being driven by value and economy stuff.
Yeah. And I wonder if that space for 2 6-packs ends up going to 3 4-packs or something. I don't know, but we'll see.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, for sure. I think there's a lot of things going on from a size pack perspective. And certainly we're seeing that in other beer segments as well as a lot of, where I see a lot of trading up into larger and larger sizes as well. Again, for I think people looking for that value.
Yeah. Yeah. No, interesting. One more for me, Rebecca Dye. I think I figured out how to pronounce it. Jonushonis. Is that correct?
I think it's close enough. Yeah, Jonushonis, I think is
Rebecca Dye Y, who is lovely, and I met briefly. How has she integrated your new CMO? How is she leaving her own mark on marketing?
Yeah, she's jumped in and kind of immediately started really, I think, filtering through. We have a lot of really, I think, strong innovation on the table. Is really helping us filter through that in partnership with Rich Rush, who started as our new CSO, was an internal hire for that job. But it's been awesome from my perspective to see they were hired kind of within weeks of each other to become kind of this really dynamic duo together. Because as you probably have witnessed over time in the beer business, sales and marketing are not notorious for getting along great.
Right.
Usually they're kind of at each other and not in a good way. And so it's been really great to kind of see both of them come in. And I think the thing that I've been appreciative of is to think through, like, not just, hey, I got this cool brand, throw it over the fence, you tell me how to execute it, from a sales perspective. They're really connecting and collaborating on that in a really powerful way. So it's been great to have those two, and I've been able to step back. I sometimes want to get back in there, just like you were earlier with your Voodoo Ranger ideas, and I have to resist the temptation.
Slip a note under the door
to do that. Yeah, an anonymous source. Here you go. But I think the other thing that we're working through, and again, you can imagine this as we think about moving from this space, when I've talked about this, where we were, traditional craft brewery to kind of this broader kind of premium alcohol beverage perspective. We really need to think about not just, hey, what brands might you have? What categories might you have? You really need to think about what's that team look like that's going to execute that. And so we've made a lot of progress on that already, but I think both of them has really been thinking about what's that org look like in the future that's going to be necessary to kind of take on a broader set of categories. Inevitably we will be in more than just craft, and that's going to take different skill sets, different ways to think about roles. So they're doing some really great thinking about that as well.
I'll conclude. I want to ask about Fat Tire. Clearly there's been and continues to be a lot of thought and investment in turning around that brand. I love the redesign. The new Vans collab is really cool. Yet trends continue to be challenged. And so I guess, what are you seeing with your efforts? And I mean, I can only assume that turning around an amber style ale in today's landscape is, not the easiest undertaking.
Yeah. Some might describe that as a challenge. Yeah. So it definitely is a challenge. And I think we've taken the approach on Fat Tire that we're going to take short-term pain to find the long-term, more sustainable foundation for the brand. And that might mean that the brand ends up in a much smaller place it ends up in a much smaller place much more quickly than it would have if we just kind of kept dragging it out. But we were okay with that because we kind of felt like we saw the writing on the wall, as you just said. An amber ale in this category is not going to be, probably a long-term opportunity. And so we're seeing that, and there's no hiding that. There's no kind of like, way to paint a rosy picture on that. We're definitely seeing the short-term pain. At the same time, really the focus that we continue to have, and what you're seeing as you described the brand, is we are seeing gains with the audience that we're really trying to bring into the brand, in the sense of people who aren't looking for amber ales, who are looking for easy drinking styles, who are younger than your traditional craft average age. We are seeing growth in that space. And the question for us is just, can we grow that faster? Can we grow that fast enough to offset some of the more longer time fans who maybe this is just less interesting? And by the way, those are the people who also were leaving us anyways, because they were on to IPAs, or they were on to bourbons, and they were on to all kinds of other things that were new styles and flavors, and things that were kind of outside of amber ale. So that's really the challenge for us, and we try to keep the focus on that. We've had some executional challenges of, I'd also not recommend switching over a 6-pack bottle pack that had been in market for 32 years to a 6-pack can in one fell swoop. That was hard. So we've certainly seen some losses from that as well. But when we think about what do you want to be in long term, that's the picture that we've kind of kept in our mind, of to make this thing something that can have sustainability in the future. It's got to look more like this. It's got to be in cans. It's got to have this kind of design. It's got to be easier drinking. It's got to have interesting, collaborations that it has going that kind of help people understand the kind of brand it is. And then we just have to see how it plays out, and our hope is that we can, again, bring in kind of that younger drinker who maybe doesn't know the brand fast enough to kind of offset those people we do lose along the way.
If you're in some ways deprioritizing it just a little bit because you see the writing on the wall, what does that mean? Does that mean maybe you take some tap handles off for Voodoo Ranger? What does that mean really?
Yeah, one of the things we've always talked about is it doesn't do us any good. And this was really probably 5 or 6 years ago, where we, Fat Tire was so much foundational to the entire company that people took it as a, personal life and death affront if Fat Tire would get removed from a tap. And where we got is like, that doesn't really do us any good to kind of say, we're going to protect something that isn't pulling. And so our team has gotten very realistic of like, hey, if it's not working, if it's not pulling in an on-premise location, if it's not working on a shelf, trying to protect it and not replace it is not going to do anything, because someone else is going to replace it. Yeah. So we've, I think, taken a much more practical perspective of where it's working. Let's make sure that we continue to support it, because there are a lot of places that it does continue to work, and those places that it doesn't, let's make sure that we end up taking care of that situation ourselves, right. Versus having a competitor come in and sell against it. Because again, at some point, right. Loyalty from an operator is only going to go so far, in terms of if the thing is not pulling on shelf or kind of on the tap tower.
Yeah, no. And I remember the mid-aughts when I was living in Indianapolis, and like you guys were just entering that market, and everyone was like, Fat Tire. It wasn't even New Belgium. It was Fat Tire, right? It was the Fat Tire Brewing Co. So I understand how hard that is. And when you guys made that whole distribution push, it was like that in every state I visited.
Yes.
Which, yeah, crazy, but quite a lineage to stand on, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's still, I mean, I will say I take it very personally, and it's a brand that I have a ton of love for, because it is so foundational as a brand expression of what the company New Belgium is all about. And so from that perspective, there's a lot for me, and I think a lot of us at this company tied up into it, and we continue to really want to drive it, while being realistic that sometimes, if you're really tied to a particular style that has lost favor, there's only so much you can do. Right.
Yep. Well, one more, and I love that you laugh every time we say one more.
I'm just waiting for another Voodoo Ranger. Sorry, I shouldn't just laugh at your questions. It's not appropriate.
I think they're Voodoo Ranger, Baby Jesus. How about that? Did I say that? It's a seasonal.
Seasonals. Yep.
No. This is one that yeah, I've started asking people in the industry. Obviously, we're grappling as an industry with this question of how we deal with this. No amount of Bev Alc is good for you. No amount is safe, which I think is a funny phraseology because no amount of driving is safe. Like anyway, but I'm curious, personally these days, when you sit down for a beer with a meal or just to relax or at a festival, do you find yourself second guessing it at all? Right. I'm curious how we feel in the industry now that this has really seeped through.
I mean, I think there's kind of two things, and that we think about a lot as well, is that I think moderation has been a bedrock of how we think about responsible consumption in the industry, and I think that it needs to continue to be the focus, and we think a lot about that, especially as our beers have migrated to kind of more of a high ABV portfolio, both internally and externally. Like our efforts and how we're really talking about moderation have become much more important. So, from my perspective, I think about that, and I think that's been pretty consistent. Of moderation is the key. I think just in life generally,
right? Yeah.
But I also think the thing that maybe is a bit overlooked in that conversation about alcohol and its benefits or risks is the emotional piece of it and the social aspect. Because I think there are some people out there maybe who Silicon Valley folks who want to live to 150 years old. I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about not just quantity of life, but quality of life. And there are so many different moments in life when having a beer to either celebrate or to just share with somebody is such a powerfully emotional and social well-being thing that I don't think is necessarily easily measurable. I was just at a really close friend's funeral this week, in fact, and being able to share a beer with friends, and talk about his life. I don't want to live in a world that doesn't exist, because it's just such a powerful thing. And so I think I come back to that idea of moderation from a physical perspective, but I do think we also need to be thinking about kind of the social aspect of alcohol, and there are benefits in my mind from that, and I obviously continue to see that in my own life, and I do think it's something that often gets overlooked in that conversation.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Well said. And I also think there's just, to your point, we're not going to live forever, right? So why try, right? If I'm going to maybe die at 90 versus 100 or even 80 versus 90, not that you can even quantify that, but, and I think the substitution effect is important to talk about too, right? If you're not, because we are humans and we have a human need to release or commiserate, to your point, right? If you're not doing that with beer, you're probably doing it with something else.
Yes.
And that something else probably ends up being just as bad, if not worse. So my personal take, but I just think it's something that is interesting to ask industry folk, right? Because we obviously see a completely different aspect and, kind of see a little bit of an agenda on the other side as well. So yeah. Jay, any thoughts too? Yeah.
No, I think we've talked about this before, but on the, on the longevity aspect, like anytime you see a news article about somebody living to 100, here's their secret. They drink like a High Life a day. And that's always like some type
Dr.
of budget
Pepper
beer every day. So hopefully we can spotlight more of those, feel good.
I think the industry has a real opportunity to, I think, make that idea clearer. And so as we think about our involvement in the BI, for example, I personally want to be careful to come across as an industry as very defensive about it, and instead really kind of point back to the work we're doing and the way we think about alcohol in general. And again, to me, they're the positive benefits, which are there, and especially when you think about it more broadly, versus just like, we got to fight these other people. And I think that has the danger of kind of coming off in the wrong way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Coming off defensive or looking, yeah, we need to reposition the conversation on our terms for good reason, right? Not Machiavellian, but the fact that beer's culture and it has been involved in building culture and the monks subsist off of beer, right? The blue zones, the people live longest. It's because they commiserate with beverage, So anyway, I agree. Yeah. Awesome. Well, any questions for us before we leave?
No, I'm going to start, although I might send you a couple of Voodoo Ranger ideas and see what you think of them.
We should just keep that list going.
Keep it going.
Just keep it going all year,
Yeah, I like it.
Nice.
No, always great to spend time with you.
Awesome. Well, you too. Well. Thank you so much, Shaun, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Good to see you.
Cheers.
Okay. Cheers. Bye.